The fat in the skillet has gone rancid. You can smell it before you are fully awake. There is grit between your teeth from the dust the herd kicked up yesterday, and the coffee in your cup is so thick you could chew it. This is breakfast, and it is the best meal you will get today. That's not a scene from a movie. Hollywood gives you the painted sunset, the clean campfire, the tin plate of beans sitting pretty in the golden hour. What Hollywood doesn't give you is the math. 10 to 15 men, months on the trail, open country with no refrigeration, no towns, and no margin for error. You either figured out how to feed people, or you lost the herd, the men, or both. The cowboy diet wasn't romantic. It was a survival system built on desperation and zero waste. We are going to walk through 5 things cowboys ate and drank on the great cattle drives of the 19th century. Trail jerky, son of a gun stew, calf fries, hardtack, and 6-shooter coffee. By the end of this, you will understand why one historian described the chuck wagon not as a kitchen, but as a field hospital that happened to serve food. Here is the central irony of the cowboy diet. These men spent months surrounded by thousands of cattle, and a fresh steak was a luxury most of them rarely tasted. Those animals weren't food, they were money, walking. The trail boss's entire investment moved on 4 legs, and every steer that arrived at the railhead in Abilene or Dodge City was profit. Slaughtering a healthy animal for dinner was roughly equivalent to a bank teller helping himself to the vault. It didn't happen, and anyone who suggested it didn't last long on the drive. So where did the beef come from? The rejects, animals too sick, too lame, or too stubborn to keep pace with the herd. When one of those went down, the cook moved fast. Meat sliced thin, packed heavy with salt, laid out in the sun and wind until it went rock solid. That was trail jerky, not the soft teriyaki glazed product you pull off a gas station shelf. This was dense, intensely salty, and demanded serious jaw work just to break down. Men ate it on horseback, gnawing through it the same way they got through most problems on the trail, slowly and without complaint. On the rare occasion a fresh animal was butchered, the cook wrung every possible calorie out of the carcass. The beef drippings left in the skillet got mixed with flour and cooked into a thick gravy called SOP, or Texas butter, ladled over biscuits. Cowboys treated it like a reward. Given that the alternative was dry jerky in the saddle, beef-flavored grease on a biscuit genuinely passed for a good meal. The bar wasn't low. The bar was underground. If jerky was the protein, pinto beans were the engine. They were cheap, dense with calories, and did not take up much room in the wagon. Cowboys called them whistleberries, which tells you everything you need to know about the social experience of sleeping shoulder to shoulder under the stars with a dozen other men on a diet heavy with beans. Making them edible was a full day's work. The cook soaked a pot at dawn, loaded it into the wagon, where the constant jostling helped break the beans down through the day, then put the pot on the fire the moment the wagon stopped. By the time the crew ate breakfast the next morning, those beans had been cooking longer than most of the men had been sleeping. The cook's real pride, though, was his sourdough biscuits. The starter lived in a clay crock, fed daily with flour and water. On cold nights, the cook slept with it tucked against his body to keep the yeast alive. If the starter died, morale dropped fast. One trail account from the 1870s put it plainly: a bad biscuit could ruin a man's disposition for a week. At the other end of the spectrum sat hardtack, simple flour, water, and salt, baked until it crossed the line from food into something closer to a ceramic tile. Cowboys called it gun wadding, and they soaked it in coffee just to get it down. The man who controlled all that food was not just a cook. On most drives, he was the second most powerful person on the trail, outranked only by the trail boss. and often better paid than the most experienced cowboys riding the herd. His official title was camp cook. Everyone called him Cookie. Most men were quietly afraid of him. The chuck wagon itself came from a cattleman named Charles Goodnight, who took a surplus army wagon in 1866 and rebuilt it into something that functioned as kitchen, pantry, pharmacy, and bank. Dutch ovens, spice tins, bed rolls, blacksmithing tools, the crew's wages, all of it lived in that wagon. Goodnight added a hinged box at the back with a folding leg that became the cook's work surface. That one modification changed how cattle drives operated. It turned a supply cart into a command post. Cookie's day started around 3 in the morning. He ground coffee, got the fire going, usually burning dried cow chips when wood was scarce, and had a full breakfast ready before the sun came up. After the crew rode out, he washed every dish, packed the entire wagon, hitched the mule team, and drove ahead of the herd to reach the next campsite first. Then he unloaded, started the fire again, and began the evening meal. The cowboys rode. Cookie ran. He was also the outfit's doctor, dentist, and barber when the situation called for it. At night, he pointed the wagon tongue toward the North Star, so the trail boss had a reliable heading come morning. His duties included navigation, medicine, logistics, and feeding the crew. The job description had no ceiling. The code around the chuck wagon was strict and non-negotiable. You did not ride close enough to kick dust into the food. You did not touch anything until Cookie called it. You did not leave food on your plate. That was an insult serious enough that men remembered it for the rest of the drive. And if you walked up to the coffee pot and another man shouted, "Man at the pot," you were obligated to pour for everyone who wanted a cup. That was the full extent of cowboy etiquette, enforced 100 miles from the nearest town. Skilled cowboys knew the value of a good cook before they ever signed on. They asked about the food the same way they asked about the pay. A poor cook could hollow out a crew's willingness to work inside of 2 weeks. Morale did not live in the saddle. It lived at the chuck wagon. When supplies ran thin, the definition of food stretched. On a working cattle drive, it stretched considerably. Son of a gun stew started with a calf too weak to keep up with the herd. The cook butchered it and used everything. Heart, liver, tongue, and kidneys went into the pot. The brains went in too, used as a natural thickener. The ingredient cowboys specifically sought out was the marrow gut, a milk-filled tube found between the calf's stomachs, only edible while the animal was still nursing. Its contents dissolved into the stew and gave it a richness that set it apart from anything else on the trail menu. As one cowboy put it, the cook threw in everything but the hair, horns, and holler. That quote gets repeated because it is accurate, not because it is colorful. This was not creativity. It was a culture that treated waste as a genuine moral failure. You did not throw away edible material. There was no system that could absorb that kind of loss, no supply chain to call, no store 2 miles down the road. The same philosophy carried into roundup season. Castration was a standard part of working cattle, and the byproduct did not get discarded. Calf fries, also called Rocky Mountain oysters, were seasoned, rolled in cornmeal, and fried in hot grease until they went golden. Period accounts describe the flavor as nutty. Cowboys considered them a treat. When your baseline was hardtack soaked in yesterday's coffee, nutty was enough to make something a delicacy. And when even the cattle-derived options disappeared, men turned to whatever the land offered. Pioneer guides from the period included written instructions for preparing skunk, with the specific warning to remove the scent glands before cooking. Cowboys followed those instructions. Hunger made the instructions worth reading carefully. Coffee wasn't comfort on the trail, it was function. A cup before a 3 in the morning watch was the difference between a man who could stay alert and one who couldn't. Cookie boiled water, threw in a fistful of grounds per cup, and let it brew with no filter and no apology. The result was black, thick, and strong enough to earn the name six-shooter coffee. The claim was it could float a revolver. The coffee landscape changed when Arbuckle's Ariosa reached the cattle drives. Before that, cooks roasted green beans over open flame, an inconsistent process that produced uneven results. The Arbuckle brothers patented a glazing technique that locked in flavor after roasting and kept beans from going stale. It became the dominant brand on drives almost overnight, which tells you how badly a reliable cup of coffee mattered when everything else about the supply chain was uncertain. The darker reality closing out the diet is this: months on the trail meant months without fresh fruit or vegetables. Canned tomatoes were the primary defense against scurvy. Disease killed more cowboys than gunfights ever did, and the food they ate was a direct cause. The romantic image of the cowboy dining peacefully under the stars does not survive contact with that fact. Pull back from the individual meals, and what you are looking at is not a cuisine. It is a pressure system. Nothing wasted, nothing guaranteed, and the man with the ladle held more authority than the man with the gun. The Hollywood version of the cowboy campfire sells you warmth and simplicity. What was on the fire was organ meat, rancid grease, and a pot of beans that had been cooking since yesterday. This was the real trail kitchen. Subscribe to Saddle and Smoke if you want the real story. Check out the next video. It is insane.